My parents skipped my wedding because I married before my perfect sister. Now their perfect family image is finally crumbling. After being together for 4 years, I, a 32-year-old woman, got married 8 months ago. Everyone attended the wedding except for my sister Milena, who is 30 years old, and my parents. Their decision to skip the event was shocking, but in retrospect, I suppose it should not have been surprising. As for Milena, her absence was almost expected. She and I have never had a great relationship, and given our family history, her behavior was entirely in character. To help you understand, let me explain our family dynamic. My parents have always favored Milena. I cannot entirely blame them. She has been remarkably talented, beautiful, and accomplished her whole life. Growing up, she seemed to excel at everything she tried, from winning spelling bees to talent shows. She was the kind of child who turned heads the moment she walked into a room, drawing admiration from teachers, parents, and peers alike. In high school, Milena checked off every possible accolade: class president, valedictorian, prom queen. Her effortless beauty, tall, slender, with striking features, only added to her aura. She even dabbled in modeling during college, securing her first professional gig in her sophomore year. That particular achievement remains one of my most vivid memories. My parents threw her a massive party to celebrate, inviting extended family and friends. Her professional headshot was framed and hung above the fireplace, where it still hangs today. That same year, I graduated with a degree in computer science. There was no party for me, not even a family dinner. My parents barely muttered a "well done" before shifting the conversation back to Milena's latest photo shoot. It was as though my hard work and achievement paled in comparison to her effortless charm. While Milena's career skyrocketed, she climbed the corporate ladder at a prestigious company, landing a corner office and a company car by the age of 30. I took a more modest path. I work as a mid-level software developer at a respectable company. I enjoy my job and find it fulfilling, but it is not the kind of career that makes parents gush with pride at family gatherings. On top of that, I do not fit society's mold of conventional beauty, especially when standing next to Milena. I am shorter, heavier, and less graceful. Growing up, my mother frequently pointed this out, often with the guise of helping. She signed me up for fitness classes I did not ask for, and put me on endless diets. Milena never struggles with her weight, she would say, or, if you put in a little more effort, you could look as nice as your sister. By high school, I had learned to ignore these comments outwardly, but they left scars. For years, I tried to earn their approval. I joined clubs they suggested, followed their advice about career paths, and even attempted modeling briefly, a humiliating failure that Milena still mocks. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. I was the other daughter, the one they tolerated while pouring their love and pride into Milena. By my mid-20s, I gave up. It was liberating. I decided to focus on building a life that made me happy. I poured my energy into my career, forming meaningful friendships and relationships with people who valued me for who I was. My interactions with my parents became polite but distant. I would smile and nod during holiday dinners while they raved about Milena's latest accomplishments or her glamorous vacations. They seemed perfectly content to overlook my emotional withdrawal as long as they could bask in Milena's glory. And then I met my husband. We crossed paths at a computer conference through a mutual friend. Unlike my family, he actually saw me. He admired my dry sense of humor, my intelligence, and even my body, the very things my parents had criticized or ignored. For the first time in my life, I felt genuinely appreciated for who I was, not compared to someone else. 4 years later, he proposed in the most unpretentious way, at home, over takeaway, and our favorite TV show playing in the background. It was perfect. It felt like the start of a life that I had built entirely on my terms. When I announced my engagement to my parents, their reaction was lukewarm at best. My mother asked if I was sure I wanted to jump right in and suggested I should work on my fitness before the wedding. My father barely said a word. During the engagement party, my parents spent most of their time in a corner, whispering into the phone. Later, my husband told me he overheard snippets of their conversation. They were talking to Milena, who was crying about how this was not the plan and how they had never expected me to get married first. It became increasingly clear during the wedding planning process that my parents were not going to be involved. My mother, who had spent years curating Pinterest boards for Milena's hypothetical wedding, showed no interest in helping me. When I found my wedding dress, a simple but elegant A-line gown that made me feel beautiful, she barely looked up from her phone and said it was practical. My future mother-in-law, on the other hand, stepped up in ways I never expected. She treated me like the daughter she never had, helping with everything from flowers to seating charts. Despite my efforts to ensure my parents had received their invitations, they claimed they never got them. They accused me of excluding them deliberately, an assertion that was both hurtful and untrue. On my wedding day, as I walked down the aisle and saw the empty seats where they should have been, I felt a mix of sorrow and liberation. Their absence spoke volumes, and for the first time, I truly let go of the hope that they would change. Naturally, I told my parents that I was engaged last year. I thought it was the kind of news that would at least spark a moment of happiness, if not pride, from them. Instead, their reaction was, well, underwhelming would be an understatement. There was no excitement, no warm congratulations, just silence. The kind of silence that makes you feel like you said something offensive or inappropriate. Finally, my mother broke the awkward stillness, not with words of joy, but with a question. "Are you sure you want to jump into this?" she asked, her voice laced with thinly veiled skepticism. Then came the cherry on top. "Maybe you should work on your physical condition before the wedding, just so you feel your best." My father, as always, said very little. He nodded once, muttered something unintelligible, and resumed reading the newspaper as if I had just told them about a minor inconvenience rather than one of the happiest moments of my life. At our engagement party, which my husband's family graciously hosted since my parents showed no interest in doing so, their behavior only got stranger. I was too overwhelmed to process it fully at the time, but my husband noticed. They spent most of the evening crouched over my mother's phone in a corner, whispering intensely. When I asked if everything was okay, they brushed me off, saying they were just responding to an urgent message. Later that night, my husband told me he overheard snippets of their conversation. They were on the phone with my sister Milena, who was crying. He could not catch everything, but he heard enough to understand the gist of it. "This was not the plan," my mother had said, her voice sharp and frustrated. "We never thought Rebecca would get married before Milena." Looking back, I should have seen this coming. Their disappointment, their reluctance, it all pointed to one glaring issue. My life's milestones were overshadowing their golden child's imagined timeline. Still, I pressed on, determined to make the wedding planning process a joyous experience, or at least as joyous as it could be without their involvement. There were, of course, minor setbacks along the way, almost all of which stemmed from my mother's indifference. For years, she had meticulously curated Pinterest boards for Milena's hypothetical wedding. She had saved links to venues, photographers, and caterers, all ready to deploy the moment Milena announced an engagement. But when it came to my wedding, there was nothing. No suggestions, no support. When I found a beautiful A-line gown that made me feel elegant and confident, I thought, foolishly, that she might share in my excitement. Instead, she glanced at it briefly and said, "Well, it's practical. It suits your figure." That was the extent of her input. Thankfully, my future mother-in-law stepped in to fill the void. She treated me like the daughter she never had, helping with everything from floral arrangements to cake tastings. She was genuinely excited about the wedding, her enthusiasm a balm to my wounded pride. Together, we managed to plan what turned out to be a beautiful day. To ensure no one was left out, I meticulously double-checked the guest list before sending out invitations. Both electronic and paper versions were sent, and I received red receipts for the digital ones. My parents' names were highlighted on every list, yet they never RSVP'd. I called, texted, and emailed repeatedly, only to be met with vague excuses about their schedules. After a while, I gave up. I had too much to focus on to keep chasing people who clearly did not want to be involved. Despite their absence, the wedding was wonderful. We had a morning ceremony in a sunlit garden, followed by a laid-back afternoon celebration. Guests told us we looked radiant, and for most of the day, I felt pure joy. But there were moments, like when I glanced at the empty seats in the front row or skipped the father-daughter dance, that their absence felt like a punch to the chest. After the honeymoon, I called them, desperate for an explanation. My mother launched into an indignant tirade. "We never got an invitation," she insisted, her voice dripping with accusation. She went on about how careless I was, how she had always dreamed of helping plan her daughter's weddings, and how hurt she was to be excluded from such an important day. At first, I was stunned. Then I was angry. I knew we had sent the invitations. I even checked our records during the call. Both the electronic and physical invitations had been delivered. But instead of confronting them, I did something I had learned to do over the years. I swallowed my frustration. "I am sorry for the oversight," I said, my voice hollow, and hung up. Later, my husband connected the dots I had been too emotionally drained to see. Their surprise at our engagement, their disinterest in the planning, their whispered phone calls with Milena, it was all part of a pattern. The idea of me, the less accomplished, less celebrated daughter, getting married before their beloved Milena was simply unacceptable to them. They had built their world around her successes, and I had disrupted their narrative. My wedding was not just an event to them, it was an affront to the family dynamic they had carefully curated. Their actions and attitudes confirmed what I had always suspected, even though I had resisted acknowledging it for so long. In their eyes, I could never compete with Milena. The most disheartening realization was that even my wedding day, which should have been a moment of joy, love, and new beginnings, was turned into another battleground in their endless mission to protect their perfect family image, with Milena firmly at the center. Milena, my ever-glamorous and adored sister, recently got engaged to someone she's been seeing for about a year. Family members I've spoken to have confirmed this. Meanwhile, my parents, who I haven't really communicated with about this, are already busy gushing over the wedding plans, even in group conversations I'm deliberately not part of. They're clearly excited about the extravagant wedding they're organizing for her. My mother is taking Milena to private fittings at high-end stores, bragging about securing expensive locations and luxury gowns. It's all the kind of mother-daughter bonding time that I was never allowed to have. It's ironic, really, that the same family members who once kept quiet about everything are now suddenly starting to pull away from Milena's wedding and engagement party. Apparently, my parents' absence at my own wedding has become quite the topic of conversation, so when family members ask me why my parents weren't there, I don't mince words. I tell them the truth, plain and simple. They couldn't bear to see me marry before their cherished Milena. I don't exaggerate the story or try to make them feel bad. I simply state the facts as I see them. A few days ago, my parents reached out to accuse me of intentionally trying to ruin Milena's wedding. They claim that relatives who have spoken to them about the situation are using my supposed actions as an excuse to avoid attending her wedding events. One of my cousins, whom Milena confided in, told her that people are hesitant to attend because they've heard about how my parents treated me. But my parents just keep denying it, claiming that I'm envious of Milena's big, fancy wedding and spreading lies to stir up drama. The thing is, I'm not lying, I'm simply telling people the truth about what happened, and if the truth makes them look bad, then maybe they should reflect on their own behavior instead of blaming me for the fallout. I find myself getting increasingly frustrated, though, because it's becoming harder and harder to keep pretending like I still have a relationship with my parents. Their actions during my wedding made it painfully clear that no matter what I did, I would never be enough for them. What hurts the most now is not their absence at my wedding anymore. It's the realization that I never had the kind of supportive, nurturing parents I always dreamed of. I used to hope they would eventually recognize me for who I am, but that hope has slowly faded away. Instead, I'm focusing on building a life with someone who truly appreciates me for who I am right now. My husband sees me, loves me, and supports me in ways that my parents never did. And while this journey of acceptance is difficult, it's also a relief to let go of the illusion of what I thought family should be. I'll keep you posted if anything significant happens, but for now, I'm moving forward with my life, away from the toxic dynamics that once defined my family. A lot has happened since my last post, which was 2 weeks ago. After reading all the incredibly supportive and encouraging comments, I finally made the decision to confront my parents face-to-face about what happened at my wedding and their current accusations that I ruined Milena's special day. I felt like it was the right time to put everything on the table, especially since they'd been texting me about how my actions had somehow tarnished their ideal family history. It was clear they wanted to make me feel guilty, but I was determined to confront them. When I called them, they didn't waste any time jumping straight into accusations. They immediately said that I was just jealous of Milena and had intentionally ruined everything. For once, instead of defending myself the way I always did, I decided to take a different approach. I agreed with them, but not in the way they expected. I said, "You're right, I am envious, but not of Milena's career or her looks or any of her accomplishments. I'm envious of the unwavering love and support you've always shown her, something you never even bothered to show me." There was a long pause on the line, and then my mother, of course, began insisting that I was exaggerating and that they'd always treated us equally. At that moment, something inside me broke. All these years of feeling unheard and unseen, all these suppressed feelings I'd buried deep inside, finally came rushing out. And then I started listing everything that had happened over the years. You don't remember every birthday when Milena's success overshadowed mine? You don't remember when she had a modeling callback and you canceled my high school graduation dinner? Do you remember how her prom dress cost more than my entire year's worth of college textbooks? I kept going, despite my father trying to interrupt and accuse me of exaggerating. I told them how year after year, they spent so much time organizing Melena's non-existent wedding while showing no interest in mine. I described how painful it was to see their seats empty at my wedding, how my mother-in-law had to step in and help me with everything, from the preparations to shopping for my dress. Instead of listening, they turned the whole thing around on me. My mother asked, "Why didn't you ever speak up if you felt this way?" As though I hadn't tried for years to tell them how I felt. Then my father jumped in, accusing me of being spiteful and unjust by discussing all of this with other family members. That's when my mother dropped the bomb. She said, "We never imagined you'd go to such lengths as to try to ruin Melena's wedding out of spite, but we always knew you were insecure about her success. This is not how we brought you up." It hit me then. They weren't even hearing me. They couldn't understand that their behavior, their constant favoritism toward Melena, was the root of the problem. They were so focused on how Melena was reacting to everything that they couldn't even see the hurt they had caused me. The pain I felt wasn't just about the wedding, it was about a lifetime of never being enough in their eyes. For the first time, I didn't try to fix things. I didn't apologize or retract anything. I said what I needed to say. "You're right about one thing. You raised me to believe I'd never measure up. You made me feel like Melena's accomplishments would always be more important than mine. And you taught me that maintaining the image of a perfect family was more important than my feelings. But you also taught me something else, something you didn't mean to teach me. You taught me that I deserve better than this." There was a long silence before my father spoke again, in that calm, collected tone of his. "Maybe it's time for us to stop acting like we're bad parents since you've already decided we are. And you obviously take pleasure in seeing us suffer. We thought that as family you would help fix this, but it's clear you've made your own decisions." And then my mother had the nerve to say, "Perhaps you just couldn't cope with not being the center of attention, even though we always tried to treat you both fairly. Rebecca, that's not our fault. You made the decision to play the victim." I didn't argue. There was no point. They had just confirmed everything I had been saying all along. They could never admit their faults, not even now. So I ended the call, simply saying goodbye. I was shocked by how relieved I felt afterward. Tears were shed, but they weren't the frantic, heartbroken tears I remember from my childhood. They were different, liberating almost. For the first time, I had said everything I needed to say without holding back, without feeling guilty for my emotions. Later that evening, I was sitting on our back porch, gazing at the sunset, when my husband sat next to me and took my hand without saying a word. After a while, I asked him, "They're never going to change, are they?" He squeezed my hand and said, "No, but you have, and that's what counts." And he's right, I've changed. The little girl who used to desperately seek her parents' approval is gone. I don't need their validation anymore, and that's the woman who emerged from that conversation. Acknowledging that my parents will never be the people I need them to be is painful, but it's nowhere near as painful as the years I spent hoping they would change. For the first time, I honestly don't care what happens with Melena's wedding or the family drama. I've said my piece, and now they have to deal with the fallout. The most surprising thing is that I feel like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. It's not the happy ending I hoped for with my parents, but maybe it's the one I needed. The ability to stop chasing a love that should have been unconditional. It's been 3 days since I had that confrontation with my parents, and things have taken a rather unexpected turn. My sister Melena decided to jump into the mix, but her attempt at stirring the pot backfired miserably. She sent me a message yesterday morning that at first glance seemed well thought out and respectful, but it didn't take long for me to see the same condescending tone she's adopted over the years. She started with, "What you said to your parents was totally inappropriate. They have helped us through every stage of our lives and given us everything. You cannot simply blame them for being poor parents because you are insecure about the decisions you have made in life." Of course, she kept going with her signature mix of moral superiority and subtle digs. "I understand that your wedding wasn't exactly what you had envisioned, but that doesn't mean you should try to destroy mine. There's nothing wrong with wanting a celebration that honors those of us who have put in a lot of effort to meet specific standards. Rebecca, not everything needs to be a contest." I didn't even bother to respond. Over the years, I've learned that engaging with her just gives her more ammunition to use against me later. Instead, I blocked her number. Melena has always been the type who can't handle being ignored, so I assumed that would be the end of it. But no. About a few hours later, my husband called me at work, laughing so hard he could barely speak. Apparently, Melena couldn't get through to me, so she found my husband's personal number, likely through some mutual acquaintance. and bombarded him with a series of texts explaining why our sister relationship had always been strained. Her first message was surprisingly professional, at least for Milena. She wrote, "As Rebecca's sister and someone who cares deeply about our family's well-being, I feel compelled to reach out." But of course, it quickly devolved into her true intentions. She told my husband that he had an obligation to help me behave in a more suitable manner because, in her words, he was the new man in Rebecca's life. The messages grew increasingly patronizing, filled with phrases like family dynamics are complex and someone with Rebecca's sensitivity might not understand the bigger picture. Then came the kicker. Surely, you understand that maintaining good relationships with successful family members like myself could be beneficial for your future. Rebecca's behavior is only hurting her own prospects and, by extension, yours. My husband, ever the skeptic when it comes to Milena, found the whole thing hilarious. He particularly enjoyed her assumption that her status as a successful businesswoman and her network of contacts would somehow impress him. "She really doesn't know me at all, does she?" he said, shaking his head. That evening when I got home, we went through the messages together, and instead of feeling hurt or upset, I found myself laughing. For the first time, I felt liberated, seeing through Milena's manipulative tactics, especially when they were aimed at someone who was completely immune to them. It was eye-opening. I realized just how much she's remained that insecure, needy teenager who can't stand anyone else being in the spotlight. Despite all her achievements, she's still that person who needs to tear others down to feel superior. It's honestly pathetic. What struck me the most was how, when her direct approach didn't work, she quickly resorted to using my husband as a pawn to manipulate me. This tactic wasn't new. It's exactly what she did in high school, trying to turn my friends against me when she couldn't bully me directly. Same strategies, different decade. But now, with a fresh perspective, I finally understood the depth of her actions. It wasn't just sibling rivalry, it was her concerted effort to make sure she was always the favorite child, the one to overshadow anything I did, the one who constantly pointed out my flaws to anyone who would listen. I don't play her games anymore. 10 years ago, her messages would have sent me spiraling into self-doubt. 5 years ago, I'd have been upset and hurt. But today, I'm just done. I find her blatant attempts at manipulation downright amusing. It's honestly like watching a bad rerun of a show I've already seen too many times. My husband's response to her was perfect. Instead of getting caught up in her drama, he simply texted, "Thank you for your concern about Rebecca's well-being. As her husband, I'm focused on supporting her happiness, not managing her behavior. I think it's best if you direct any future concerns to Rebecca directly. Have a nice day." Milena sent one last message after that, trying to guilt-trip him into siding with her. "I see she's poisoned you against the family too. Don't say I didn't try to help when this all blows up in your faces." That last message, ironically, just made me more determined than ever to keep my distance from all the toxic dynamics in my family. It's clear now that nothing has changed with her. She's still the same manipulative, controlling person she's always been, trying to dictate every story, and she perceives any deviation from her ideal family narrative as a threat. But what really struck me was how utterly ineffective she was in trying to manipulate my husband. That was the most satisfying part of the entire ordeal. Her attempt to cause a rift between my husband and me failed spectacularly. If anything, it only brought us closer together. We laughed about her texts and ended up planning a weekend getaway to celebrate the fact that we're not caught up in her drama. It's funny, Milena thought she could pull us apart, but all she did was strengthen our bond. I've come to realize that real family isn't about maintaining a perfect facade or sticking to a story that fits everyone else's narrative. It's about standing together, supporting one another, and laughing through the tough moments, especially when someone, even your own sister, tries to manipulate you. I'm more certain than ever that I'm better off staying away from Milena's wedding drama. Instead of getting caught up in my family's never-ending power struggles, my husband and I are focused on creating our own happiness. I've also learned that success isn't about impressing anyone. It's about accepting your decisions, trusting yourself, and surrounding yourself with people who encourage your growth, not people who try to hold you back. By that measure, I feel more successful than I ever have before. So, after the whole failed attempt by my sister to manipulate my husband a couple of weeks ago, things have taken some pretty unexpected turns. Honestly, things are getting worse, not better, despite my parents' frantic attempts to fix their image. It seems they've been on this wild mission to rewrite the narrative and are desperately trying to paint me as the villain. I found out through some family channels that they've been calling up every single relative separately and accusing me of spreading nasty rumors because I'm apparently jealous of Melena's perfect wedding. They've even gone so far as to claim that I'm just bitter because her wedding is going to be more sophisticated and beautiful than mine ever was. I mean, it's hilarious that despite living in the same house they've had for 30 years and using the same email addresses they've had since the dawn of email, they're now saying I sent the wedding invitation to an old email and an outdated physical address. How convenient. The good news, though, is that their desperate attempts to cover their tracks are failing miserably. Honestly, no one's buying it. A lot of family members have started to speak out about my parents' history of favoritism. One of my aunts even recalled how my mom had pulled similar stunts at family weddings in the past, always making sure Melena was the center of attention. But the real payoff for me has been seeing how my extended family has responded to all this manipulation. A lot of the important relatives, the ones who were supposed to play major roles in Melena's wedding, have suddenly stopped supporting her. Some of them might even lose access to the exclusive venue they had lined up for the event because they're just not on board anymore. Heck, even one of our family friends' luxury clothing businesses has apparently run into scheduling issues that make it impossible for them to provide services for the wedding. Things reached a breaking point last weekend at a family gathering. Apparently, when someone innocently asked about my wedding pictures, my mom snapped. She went off on this jealous, defensive rant, accusing me of changing after I got married and trying to ruin the family's reputation. It was unbelievable. Her tantrum completely backfired, and it left a number of relatives, who were previously unaware of the situation, stunned. It did nothing but harm the perfect family image they'd been so carefully maintaining. The irony is that my parents' frantic attempts to preserve this ideal family facade are exactly what's causing it to crumble. The more they try to explain away their absence from my wedding, the more they expose who they really are. People are finally starting to see through the deception, and they're not just believing the things my parents are saying about me. They're starting to see the truth. Family members who once remained neutral are now picking sides. Even my uncle, my dad's brother, who's always kept quiet to avoid rocking the boat, recently apologized for not speaking up sooner about how my parents treated me. He's now made the decision not to attend any of Melena's wedding-related events, and I think that speaks volumes. And here's the thing, I don't even need to respond to any of this. The truth is taking care of it all for me. Every time Melena and my parents try to twist the story, they just end up revealing more of their toxic behavior. All those years of me staying silent, of just trying to keep the peace and tolerate their treatment, was really just me enabling their actions. It's a huge relief to finally realize that I don't have to carry that burden anymore. My husband put it perfectly when he said, they built this facade of the ideal family over the years, but it was always based on emotional manipulation and favoritism. Eventually, it was going to fall apart. And that's exactly what's happening. Personally, I'm doing better than I ever have before. I don't have to worry about trying to earn my parents' approval anymore. I'm no longer stressed about managing Melena's emotions or worrying about living up to their false image of what a perfect family should be. For the first time in my life, I'm not concerned about maintaining their illusion of perfection. Sometimes, the best form of retaliation is just letting the truth speak for itself. You don't have to do anything drastic, just let the facts come out and people will see things for what they are. I have to say, I'm really grateful to Reddit for giving me the courage to stand up for myself. You all have no idea how much your support and encouragement have meant to me along this journey. It's been incredible to see what real family support looks like, especially from strangers I've never met in person. So, thank you all for following along. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell so you can stay updated with more real-life stories like mine. Trust me, there's a lot more where this came from.